In this video, we delve into a tragic case that shook a small town in Missouri and is sure to leave you stunned. A 9-year-old girl disappeared overnight, sparking fear, confusion, and heartbreaking questions. On November 3, 2007, she vanished from her bedroom, and by November 9th, she still hadn't been seen or heard from. The tight-knit community of Stella, where she was last spotted, was gripped with worry. Investigators faced countless dead ends and had no clue where she might be or what had happened until a tip finally came in. Locals directed police to Fox Cave in McDonald County, which was described more as a deep pit than a traditional cave. The site was roughly 30 from the road, nestled in a densely wooded area. Sheriff's Deputy Mike Hall and Jacobs investigated and discovered a child's body resting on a ledge about 20 ft down. Stella, Missouri was a tiny town with fewer than 200 residents. Among them was Rowan Ford, who had chosen to make it her home. Born on April 11, 1998, she was 9 years old at the time. A fourth grader full of energy and joy, Rowan loved reading, drawing, and riding her bike outdoors. Rowan loved attending church and often woke up early to help the pastor with preparations. When she returned home, she could always be found sitting on the steps with a bright smile. She also attended Sunday school and participated in angel food ministries. Rowan adored Barbies, and her pink bedroom reflected that passion. Yet, life wasn't always easy. She frequently struggled with lice. Her hair often became tangled, and despite the cold Missouri winters, she sometimes went to school without socks. Nevertheless, Rowan was a dedicated student, and her teachers cherished having her in class. She always put in her best effort, even when subjects like math were challenging. One teacher described her as a little sunshine and the sweetest girl you could ever meet. Rowan was raised alongside 2 older brothers and a younger sister. Naturally shy, she would sometimes hide behind her older sister. But when she finally spoke, her sister said it was like the room lit up. Rowan was truly special. There wasn't anyone who didn't like her. She lived with her 44-year-old mother, Colleen, and her 25-year-old stepfather, David Spears. David, in addition to being a husband, was also a father. He was supposed to pay $29 in child support in 2005, though it was unclear if he ever saw his child. Rowan was always eager to greet Colleen when she returned from work, running out to the driveway to check how her shift had gone. But that day, Rowan wasn't there. On November 3, 2007, when Colleen went inside, she assumed Rowan might be in her bedroom reading, as she often did, but she wasn't there. She wasn't anywhere on the property, and David was asleep on the couch. Colleen asked him where Rowan was, and he said she was at a friend's house, though he didn't mention which friend. When Colleen called the police, David insisted that Rowan had to be at a friend's home. Colleen and David waited for hours, hoping for a call that would confirm her location, but no call came. They then searched the surrounding area but found nothing. At 6:50 p.m., a tip confirmed Rowan was missing. An Amber Alert was issued and a large-scale search quickly got underway. Many residents of Stella came out to help search for Rowan, joining neighbors in the effort. With a missing child, every moment counts, so finding her quickly was critical. Investigators first needed to determine where she had been the night before, who she had been with, and most importantly, who had seen her last. Rowan had been with her stepfather, David, while her mother worked an overnight shift at Walmart. David told police that on the night of November 2nd, he had gone out with his friends, Christopher and Nathan, leaving Rowan alone while she slept on her bedroom floor. He returned home around midnight, but admitted he hadn't checked on her, though he implied things would eventually be okay. David told police that he had gone out a second time around 1:30 a.m. supposedly to take his SUV. He also called his mother, who admitted she hadn't checked on Rowan while waiting for him to return. She had just been watching TV. One detail police found troubling was that David refused to explain exactly where he had been that night or why he had been gone for hours. He did admit that leaving Rowan alone was a mistake and said he hadn't initially told police because he feared they might suspect him. Newton County Sheriff Chris Jennings described it as very odd that Rowan wasn't reported missing until 8 to 10 hours after she was last seen. Investigators knew they needed to speak with Nathan and Christopher to see if their accounts aligned and to gain a clearer picture of what had happened. Police interviewed Nathan, who explained that he, Christopher, and David had met earlier that evening at a farm where they were working. After stopping at a liquor store, they went to Christopher's place to play pool. Around 8:30 p.m., Colleen left for her shift at work, leaving Rowan alone at home. Later that night, Christopher asked Nathan for a ride home, and David went along with them, leaving Rowan by herself. During the night, they continued drinking and smoking marijuana. On the way to Christopher's trailer, they stopped to buy more alcohol. About an hour later, Nathan and David left to return home. To avoid the risk of being stopped for drunk driving, Nathan took back roads instead of the highway. After dropping David off, Nathan arrived home by midnight. Christopher Collins, David's friend who had been with him the night Rowan was last seen, told police a story similar to Nathan's but omitted the part about smoking marijuana. This interview took place on November 4th. The following day, Christopher said he stayed in his caravan and hadn't spoken to David, unaware that Rowan was missing. Meanwhile, the Stella community continued searching for her. When the FBI joined the investigation the next day, a large-scale effort unfolded. Officers from 3 counties, 50 specialists, the Missouri State Highway Patrol, and FBI agents all collaborated to locate Rowan. While David was still being questioned by deputies, FBI agents seized both his car and his mother's car, which he had borrowed that night. Around the same time, Newton County officers visited Christopher at his workplace and asked him to answer additional questions. He agreed and went to the sheriff's office by car. Christopher also consented to a polygraph test and a computer voice stress analysis, which examines a person's voice for signs of deception. He insisted he had no idea where Rowan was and offered to help in the search for her. That afternoon, Wheaton Police Chief Clinton Clark was on a routine patrol. Clark had known Christopher for 17 years, and Christopher trusted him, often seeking his guidance and support even after his mother passed away. Christopher approached Clark, explaining that Rowan had gone missing and that he was helping search for her. Clark noticed that Christopher seemed out of sorts and unusually agitated. At that point, Chief Clark informed the FBI that Christopher had mentioned Rowan was missing and suggested he might know more than he was saying. The FBI advised Clark to continue speaking with Christopher, who insisted he was willing to help in any way possible. Christopher also told the FBI that he suspected David might be involved in Rowan's disappearance, and even offered to wear a wire to assist the investigation. He went further, providing them with potential locations to search for Rowan. Her disappearance struck the small town deeply, leaving residents scared and confused, understandably so. The day Rowan vanished was also the last time Tammy Marshall, one of her teachers, saw her. Noticing that Rowan's hair needed brushing, Tammy and Rowan spent about 30 minutes before class combing it and tying it into a neat knot. Rowan was still in the classroom when Tammy went to check on her hair. Later that day, when she was alone, she skipped past Tammy looking happy and carefree as if everything was fine. Attention soon focused on David, Christopher, and Nathan, since they were the last people known to have seen her. Investigators described Christopher as cooperative, concerned, and polite. That evening, Christopher visited Colleen to offer his assistance and check on the progress of the search. He and David had been longtime friends, and earlier that year, Christopher had even lived in the family's basement for a few months. Rowan often asked him for help with her schoolwork and affectionately referred to him as Uncle Chris. Christopher was also a father with 3 children under the age of 10 living in Arkansas with their mother. In October 2007, he had gone to his family's farm and stayed in a caravan there. By November 6, 3 days after Rowan was reported missing, the investigation began focusing on David Spears, as many people had already spoken to him and searched his home. That early evening, Christopher went to Chief Clark's office to report that the FBI had interviewed him and to ask for advice on potential places to search. Captain Clark noticed that Christopher seemed preoccupied and scared. It was unusual that Christopher avoided eye contact when discussing the FBI interview with Clark. If Christopher were involved and needed to confess, the FBI believed he would likely confide in Chief Clark. That's why they enlisted Clark's help in the investigation, and he agreed. On November 7th, Christopher met with the FBI at the Newton County Sheriff's Department and consented to provide a DNA swab. He also allowed them to search his home and a safe he kept at David's house. During the interview, Christopher told the FBI that David's claim of having other plans the night Rowan disappeared was false. He became increasingly nervous and emotional whenever the missing child was mentioned. At one point, he warned the agents that he would refuse to speak further if they implied he had any involvement in her disappearance. The interview ended at that point. Afterwards, Christopher went to see Chief Clark, visibly upset about the meeting. He said that if anything further came up, he would remain silent and suggested he might need to take legal action. Clark told him he could make his own choices, but emphasized that Christopher should do everything possible to help find Rowan. There was no reason for him to stop cooperating with the investigation. Chief Clark made sure Christopher was reminded of his Miranda rights. Understanding the importance of following proper procedure, Christopher responded that if he had more information, he would share it. He agreed to the terms of his release and continued talking. Noticing Christopher seemed distressed, Chief Clark asked if he knew anything about what had happened to Rowan. Christopher began to cry, insisting that he would never hurt Rowan and that he loved her. At that moment, someone intervened and ended the conversation. Christopher quickly stood up and left. Chief Clark informed the FBI about the incident, noting that he believed Christopher was on the verge of breaking down. He suspected that Christopher would soon hire a lawyer. The following day, Chief Clark provided the FBI with more details about Christopher Collins, his family, and his relationship with Rowan. He suggested that Christopher might know something about what happened, but emphasized that the first priority was to locate her body. Once Rowan's body was found, the FBI decided they wanted Chief Clark to be the one to speak with Christopher. Another significant breakthrough came the next day, confirming everyone's worst fears. David and Christopher both worked in the automotive business for Mark Bridges, the coroner of Newton County. Christopher worked as a mechanic, while David had some automotive experience and sold vehicles. Bridges described himself as a jack of all trades. He recalled that David had called him for the first time while on duty, the very day Rowan was reported missing. "I guess he thought I used to be the sheriff and could help." Mark said David repeatedly told him that Rowan might be at a friend's house. Mark accompanied David in searching for Rowan on November 8th. According to reports, the FBI had wired him and even monitored them from a plane. It was David who went outside to search, making it seem as though Christopher was responsible for everything. He asked David to play the role of devil's advocate. I mentioned that I suspected Chris might be involved. Then I asked if he were Chris, what would he have done with Rowan's body? He thought about it for a moment. I suggested they should go search and they agreed. The first place he led me to was a hole in the ground. But what exactly did that hole represent? A fox passed by. I noticed a few items that made me suspicious, Mark said. I wasn't sure what they were. He and David had discussed it at the time. Mark was determined to search the cave, and he believed that deep down David wanted to as well. David had a reason for bringing him there. Not long after, on November 9th, the FBI reached out to the McDonald County Sheriff's Department. Around 8:00 a.m., deputies Mike Hall and Jake arrived to conduct a search. They discovered the body of a child resting on a ledge about 20 feet down. Newton County Sheriff Chris Jennings later stated, "I wasn't present when the body was recovered, but I don't think anyone doubted it was a homicide." Rowan's suspicions were confirmed, a fact supported by the autopsy results. The report showed she had been strangled. Her body bore small cuts and bruises, evidence of injuries inflicted before her death. Severe damage to her face suggested she had been thrown into the pit. Chief Clark first learned that Rowan's body had been discovered when he turned on the news on November 9th. Soon after, his office informed him that Christopher had been present and wanted to speak with him. The FBI instructed Chief Clark to locate Christopher and inform immediately that Rowan's body had been found. but Chief Clark couldn't track him down. Then his phone rang. It was Christopher himself. When Christopher asked if the police were tailing him in a gray minivan, Clark told him he had no knowledge of anyone spying on him. Christopher explained that he felt frightened and threatened, so he had been driving aimlessly around the area to shake the feeling. Christopher said he wanted to meet, but Chief Clark directed him to come to the police station instead. Christopher agreed, and Clark drove him there in his patrol car. When they finally met, Clark told him, "Well, son, it's over. We found Rowan's body this morning." The words made Christopher's eyes fill with tears, and he lowered his head. Deep down, Christopher knew what David had done, and that was exactly what weighed most heavily on Clark's mind. "Please just tell the truth," Clark urged him. Christopher was startled by the number of people gathered at the department and didn't want to speak in front of them. Instead, he suggested they go to Money Bridge, only a few miles from Wheaton. Before leaving, Chief Clark made sure to notify the department of their location. When they arrived at the bridge, Christopher extended his hands as if ready to be cuffed. The officers told him that wasn't necessary, but Christopher replied, "Because of what I'm about to tell you, it will be." Sitting on the slope by the bridge, he repeated the same story he had been sharing all week up until the point when Nathan and David left his caravan. He explained that they had taken the back roads to avoid being caught driving under the influence. Christopher claimed he had told Rowan he could help her leave quickly before Nathan and David returned. He drove straight down the highway, the quickest route to the property. After stopping to use the restroom, he went into Rowan's room. Lifting her from the floor, he carried her outside and placed her in his truck while she was still asleep. By the time they reached his caravan, she hadn't stirred, which he hoped would prevent her from recognizing his voice. Without speaking, he brought her inside. Then he said he was going to take her home. As they walked, he gripped her arms and turned her face away so she couldn't look at him, but she managed to glance back and saw his face. She recognized him instantly. He was someone who had helped her with homework before. The man Rowan knew as Uncle Chris said he panicked. Finding a rope in a pickup near the property, he used it to strangle Rowan in the bed of his truck. Afterward, he admitted he realized he was in serious trouble. At first, he planned to dump her body off Money Bridge, but changed his mind, fearing she would be discovered too quickly. He drove aimlessly for a while, debating where to leave her remains before settling on Fox Cave. There, he dropped her body into the sinkhole and tried covering the opening with branches, though the gap was far too wide to conceal. Later, when he got home, he noticed blood on his clothes and bedding. To destroy the evidence, he burned Rowan's pants, pajamas, the rope, and his own clothing in a wood stove. His plan was to roll up the mattress and stuff it into a drum. "I figured that would make a massive fire, something people would notice right away," he admitted. Instead, he dragged the drum to the barn and set it ablaze. The entire account was horrific, and learning the extent of Rowan's suffering made it even harder to hear. Christopher and Chief Clark returned to the police station so other officers could listen to his statement. He was read his rights once more, then repeated his story to detectives from Berry County, Newton County, and the FBI. He also signed a consent form allowing investigators to search his property. Afterward, he was transferred to the Berry County Sheriff's Department, where he gave his statement yet again. This time, his statement was captured on video. He admitted it was his fault and said he had been crying like a baby all afternoon. The police were stunned since they had believed Christopher only suspected David of killing Rowan. But after further questioning, David himself confessed, adding even more confusion to the case. David claimed that when he went to check on Rowan, she wasn't there. He told Copeland that he knew Chris had taken her to his house. According to him, Chris had beaten her and he had been involved as well. Fearing they were both in serious trouble, they decided to kill her and dispose of her body in the hole. At first, he claimed he had only been driving around, but it later became clear they were actually transporting Rowan's body away from the crime scene. David told police that Christopher had handed him the rope and he used it to kill her. "I choked her with it. I realized she's gone. She's really gone," he said. The transcript shows investigators confronted Christopher with David's statement. Christopher, however, insisted that David had nothing to do with the crime or its aftermath. The case now centered on two men, one confessing, the other denying the other's involvement. What was already a complicated investigation grew even murkier. A report from Barry County Sheriff Mick Epperly to the prosecutor stated that both men had beaten Rowan, but it remained uncertain who had actually strangled her. Part of the case rested on Christopher's own statements. Both Stephen Collins and David Spears were charged with first-degree murder, as well as statutory rape and forcible rape. Sheriff Epperly believed Christopher would face kidnapping charges, but not David, since David had been Rowan's legal guardian. Both men were held at the Barry County Jail without bond. In the meantime, David's mother visited him regularly. During one of those visits, David again admitted involvement, but claimed he had blacked out and was only now remembering details. His mother broke down in tears, saying, "He's my only son." His brother Greg said he couldn't accept it. He's devastated. He loved her so much. I can't believe he could do something like this. He has 3 kids of his own. On November 27th, Colleen filed for divorce from David. Bill, the town's mayor, said she was too distraught to speak with reporters. "She's numb right now. She's keeping herself busy," he explained, noting that she was at her sewing machine making something for her little girl's funeral. At Rowan School, classmates and staff planted a pink dogwood tree in her memory. The morning before her funeral, friends released balloons with handwritten notes attached. An angel marker was also placed to honor both her birthday and the day she was found. Rowan was laid to rest at Gospel Lighthouse Church, where her favorite hymn, "The Old Rugged Cross," was sung. More than 300 mourners gathered to grieve and remember her. The minister urged everyone to let go of their hatred and anger. Meanwhile, Chris Collins and David Spears entered plea of not guilty. Christopher was bound over for trial, meaning the court found enough evidence to send the case forward. David's attorneys requested the trial be moved from Barry County to Pulaski County due to extensive media coverage, and the request was granted since David and Christopher were being tried separately. The change of venue was possible. Because of the case's complexity, the trials were expected to take years to begin. Then came an unexpected development. The charges of statutory rape, forcible rape, and first-degree murder against David Spears were dropped. After discussions with the Attorney General's office and the arrival of new evidence from an independent lab, Barry County Prosecutor Johnny Cox reached a plea agreement with David. David was sentenced to 4 years in prison for obstructing justice and 7 years for endangering the welfare of a child. Both penalties were the maximum allowed for those charges. It was not an easy decision, the prosecutor admitted, noting that David had confessed to involvement in Rowan's murder shortly after his arrest. "This case has nearly consumed my office's resources for the past 4 years and 10 months, he added. That was how long it had been since the case was last before the court. Although David Spears had been tied to Rowan Ford's murder, investigators had been searching for evidence beyond his own words. No new proof connecting him to the crime was ever found. Testing and forensic analysis failed to implicate him, and in fact, the results conflicted with his earlier statements. One piece of evidence was a test kit collected during Rowan's autopsy. It was later examined by an independent lab, the State Police Lab and the FBI lab. The results aligned with Christopher's account of what happened that night, confirming what the outside lab had found. Prosecutor Cox also noted that David's confession to killing Rowan didn't add up. The absence of physical evidence tying David to the murder raised serious doubts about his statements to police. Christopher, on the other hand, consistently maintained that no one else was involved. He repeated this in both his earliest and final interviews. According to Cox, Christopher Collins admitted to strangling Rowan Ford every single time he spoke with investigators. Cox explained that he faced a difficult dilemma. He would have been forced to defend Christopher's version of events, while also defending David's 2 accounts that directly contradicted each other. He worried this could have led to David's case being overturned if he were convicted of the more serious charges, and potentially cause Christopher's conviction to be overturned as well. The state could not accept either of those outcomes. He said, "This kind of crime should outrage everyone." Cox stated, "When I first learned of it, I was sickened. But as a prosecutor, I am a minister of justice. I must follow the law, seek the truth, and pursue what is fair and just. Sheriff Robert M.T. Vanson agreed, saying Cox had made the right decision. The judge also noted there was no physical evidence strong enough to convict David Spears. So, even though it was a difficult decision, the prosecutor said he did what was necessary, stressing that Collings had repeatedly sworn he acted alone. The evidence ultimately pointed to Collings as the killer. While parts of Spears' confession echoed this, the proof tying Collings to the crime still left some unanswered questions. Sheriff Ovenson raised the question many people were asking. Why would anyone confess to such a horrific act? The public wants to know, and there's no clear answer, he admitted. He agreed with the prosecutor, saying he himself was never fully convinced of Spears' guilt and feared the case could collapse in court, possibly leading to an acquit. Later, Chris Collings filed a motion to suppress, seeking to exclude from trial all evidence gathered from his police statements, his property, his trailer, his truck, and even his body. The court denied his request. The trial was expected to last about a week. In court, Christopher Collings' attorney argued that his client struggled deeply with emotional connections, the result of severe neglect by his parents and trauma from years in foster care. Collings was the youngest of 6 children, all of whom had been placed in foster care because their parents were drug addicts and criminals. Later in life, Collings became a father, but his ongoing battles with drugs and alcohol brought him constant trouble. His defense attorneys insisted he never intended to kill Rowan. They urged the jury to set aside the disturbing autopsy photos and the emotional weight of Rowan's young age, and instead focus only on the law and evidence, which they claimed showed there was no premeditation. Colleen, Rowan's mother, was among those who testified in court. The judge asked her what impact learning of Rowan's death had on her. "It completely devastated me and my other children," she replied. Rowan's sister testified as well, saying she collapsed to the floor when she first learned her sister had been killed. She described how the tragedy had left the entire family heartbroken. Finally, after a long and painful trial, the ordeal came to an end. On March 20th, the jury delivered its verdict. In this case, the death penalty was an option, making the sentencing phase especially critical. The prosecution presented 6 victim impact statements describing the devastating effects of the crime. In response, Christopher's defense team called 2 witnesses who suggested David might have played a role in Rowan's death. They also brought in a human development specialist who testified that Christopher had received no emotional care during the first 6 months of his life, which stunted his development. Experts further explained that Christopher struggled to form connections with others and was diagnosed with severe disorganized attachment disorder, as well as intermittent explosive personality disorder. When the sentencing phase concluded, the jury recommended the death penalty. Afterward, a series of appeals followed. On July 23, 2012, Christopher's attorneys formally appealed the sentence to the Missouri Supreme Court. In Missouri, death penalty cases automatically trigger appeals. In 2014, Christopher's petition was denied. He later filed another appeal, seeking to have his sentence reduced to life in prison, but that too was rejected. He then petitioned the Missouri Supreme Court for a writ of habeas corpus, arguing that prosecutors had withheld evidence about one of their key witnesses, Wheaton Police Chief Clinton Clark, who had a criminal record dating back to his service in Vietnam. The state responded that revealing Chief Clark's past would not have changed the outcome of the trial. Meanwhile, David Spears' situation took a different turn. In 2015, after spending more than 7 years in prison, he was released through a connection with his trial lawyer's husband. He secured a job at the Missouri State Public Defender Office. He completed his probation soon after his release. He was required to work at the office for 18 months before completing probation. Both Christopher and David were represented by attorneys from the Public Defender's Office. Christopher's lawyers later argued that David's employment there created a conflict of interest, preventing their client from negotiating a plea to lesser charges. In court filings, his attorney admitted they suspected a conflict might exist, but out of uncertainty or fear of how Collings would respond, they never disclosed it to him or to the court. Christopher himself didn't learn about this issue until after his post-conviction proceedings had ended, since it had never been shared with him. His petition for clemency emphasized his brain disorder, which impaired his awareness, judgment, and decision-making. It also highlighted his history of illness as a child. The letter explained that this left Christopher damaged and without guidance on how to grow into a functioning adult. His clemency petition also pointed to David Spears' earlier admission that he had killed Rowan, noting transcripts of police interviews where David claimed Christopher handed him the rope and he used it to strangle her. Christopher Collins' fate was sealed when the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his appeal, and Missouri Governor Mike Parson denied his request for clemency. Parson, a former sheriff who had overseen a dozen executions, had never commuted a death sentence. On December 3, 2024, Christopher Collins was executed by lethal injection with pentobarbital. Newton County Sheriff Chris Jennings, who had been part of the original investigation, said he felt the execution had been inevitable for a long time. "I hoped the state would carry it out while I was still in office." Jennings said, "I requested to be there for the execution. I believed it was the right thing for Rowan." He also admitted that true justice could never be achieved for her. "I wish more could have been done and that some of the other charges hadn't been dropped, but this is how it ended." After many years, the date was finally set. Christopher Collins was scheduled to be executed on December 3, 2024. At 5:54 p.m., witnesses were brought into place. 4 members of his defense team, 4 journalists, 8 state representatives, and 2 of Rowan's family members. At 6:00 p.m., Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey notified the Department of Corrections that there were no remaining legal barriers to proceeding. 9 minutes later, Collins, age 49, was pronounced dead. A letter he had written was read aloud afterward. In it, he stated, "Right or wrong, I accept this situation for what it is. I'm sorry to anyone I've hurt in this life. I hope you can put this behind you and move forward. No matter what side you're on, please know that I pray for you and hope to see you in heaven one day." Those were the final words from Christopher Collins, read after his execution. Following his death, Sheriff Jennings reflected on the case, saying he believed the system had failed Rowan. "It's unfortunate the police were never called, even though there were plenty of warning signs about her situation. If we had known, I'd like to think we would have removed her from it," he said. "I suppose the conclusion of this case offers some peace of mind. There's a measure of justice here, but only a little. I'll take what I can. So many people were tied to this case that it will never truly fade from memory." Sheriff Jennings called it the worst crime he had seen in his 44 years of service. He had investigated many murders, but this one affected him the most. He revealed that he had carried Rowan's school ID in his pocket ever since the case and still keeps it with him to this day. He explained that her death reshaped the way Newton County approaches investigations involving children. "We handle many cases of child abuse and neglect," he said, "and of course, the safety of children will always come first. We hate having to remove kids from their homes, but when there's no other option, we must." Sheriff Jennings said, "This case is always on our minds." Rowan's death continued to weigh heavily on her community. Todd Hall, a teacher who testified at the trial, admitted he couldn't bring himself to clear off her desk for some time afterward. She was the kind of student every teacher hopes for. Holt said school was all about learning and working hard for Rowan. She wanted to build a better life for herself. Rowan's best friend Tyler left a lasting mark as well. His mother recalled how Rowan's quiet nature balanced out her lively son. "It felt almost like losing my own child," she said. Even years later, Tyler still talks about Rowan. His grief was so deep that for a while he couldn't sleep alone. Rowan's older sister also carried the loss heavily. "I'll always remember and love her," she said. "I'm proud of the young woman she was becoming. When my sister died, a piece of me died too." If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We post crime case videos every night. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant.